There was a certain man from Ramathaim, a Zuphite from the hill country of Ephraim, whose name was Elkanah son of Jeroham. He had two wives, Peninnah and Hannah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had none. One day she made a vow, saying, Lord Almighty, if you will only look on your servant's misery and remember me, and not forget your servant but give her a son, then I will give him to the Lord for all the days of his life, and no razor will ever be used on his head. So in the course of time Hannah became pregnant and gave birth to a son. She named him Samuel, saying, Because I asked the Lord for him. When Samuel the child was weaned, Hannah dedicates him to God. Samuel's mother, Hannah, praises the Lord for allowing her to have Samuel and dedicates him to the temple. She warns the people to not be arrogant, for God weighs their actions. He can make the rich poor and the poor rich. She says that he can also bring up a lowly man and cast down a man who is too full of himself. God will also destroy his enemies and exalt those who believe in him. When Samuel had come of age, he was given to the Lord, and ministered before the Lord under Eli the prophet. Then the Lord called Samuel as he was sleeping, thinking it was Eli. He went and said, Here I am, you called me. Eli said no. This happened 3 times, and each time Eli told Samuel he did not call him. But Eli sensed that it was the Lord who was calling Samuel and advised him to answer God and listen to him. The Lord called to Samuel for a 4th time. Samuel responded by saying he was the Lord's servant and was willing to do whatever it is the Lord intended to ask of him. The Lord told Samuel that he would forever punish the house of Eli because Eli's family blasphemed against God and Eli did nothing to stop them. When Eli asked, Samuel told Eli the harsh news. Eli accepted it as he felt the Lord was right to do what was good based on his judgment. The Lord was with Samuel as he grew up, and he let none of Samuel's words fall to the ground. And all Israel from Dan to Beersheba recognized that Samuel was attested as a prophet of the Lord. The Lord continued to appear at Shiloh, and there he revealed himself to Samuel through his word. Israel and the Philistines go to war and the Philistines defeat the Israelites. The elders, wondering why this happened and decided to bring the Ark of the Covenant into battle with them. Thinking that Ark will protect them and forgetting God. The Philistines heard the Ark was brought in and yet decided to fight on despite their fear, and they once again defeat the Israelites. This time, they lose 30,000. Not only did this calamity happen, but the Philistines captured the Ark itself and Eli's 2 sons were also killed. When Eli heard about Israel's defeat and that his sons died, and also the Ark was taken, he died in a fall. After the Philistines had captured the Ark of God, they took it from Ebenezer to Ashdod. Then they carried the Ark into Dagon's temple and set it beside Dagon. The people of Ashdod rose early and went to see the Ark. There they found that their statue of Dagon fell on the ground beside the Ark. They put the statue back in place, but the following morning they found the statue had fallen again and parts of the statue was broken and only the body remained. Then God had sent a plague on the Philistines and afflicted them with tumors. So the rulers decided to send the Ark of the God of Israel away. Let it go back to its own place, or it will kill us and our people. The Ark was returned to the people of Israel. So the men of Kiriath-Jearim came and took up the Ark of the Lord. They brought it to Abinadab's house on the hill and consecrated Eleazar his son to guard the Ark of the Lord. The Ark remained at Kiriath-Jearim a long time, 20 years in all. Then all the people of Israel turned back to the Lord. So the Israelites put away their Baals and Ashtoreths, and served the Lord only. They confessed their sins before the Lord, and Samuel offered a burnt offering to the Lord. The Philistines attempted to attack the Israelites in Mizpah, however with God behind them the Israelites defeated the Philistines. Samuel continued as Israel's leader all the days of his life. From year to year he went on a circuit from Bethel to Gilgal to Mizpah, judging Israel in all those places. When Samuel grew old, he appointed his sons as Israel's leaders. The name of his firstborn was Joel and the name of his second was Abijah, and they served at Beersheba. But his sons did not follow his ways. They turned aside after dishonest gain and accepted bribes and perverted justice. So the elders of Israel asked Samuel to appoint a king to lead them. Samuel was displeased and prayed to the Lord. God said, "Listen to them and give them a king." As God had shown, Samuel anoints Saul son of Kish a Benjamite. Samuel explained to the people the rights and duties of kingship. He wrote them down on a scroll and deposited it before the Lord. Nahash the Ammonite went up and besieged Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said to him, "Make a treaty with us, and we will be subject to you." But Nahash the Ammonite replied, "I will make a treaty with you only on the condition that I gouge out the right eye of every one of you and so bring disgrace on all Israel." When the messengers informed Saul, he burned with anger. The men of Israel numbered 300,000. Saul separated his men into 3 divisions, attacked and slaughtered the Ammonite. Samuel gives a farewell speech. Among his detailed speech he finally says, "You have done all this evil, yet do not turn away from the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. Do not turn away after useless idols. They can do you no good, nor can they rescue you, because they are useless. The sake of his great name the Lord will not reject his people, because the Lord was pleased to make you his own. As for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by failing to pray for you. And I will teach you the way that is good and right. But be sure to fear the Lord and serve him faithfully with all your heart. Consider what great things he has done for you. Yet if you persist in doing evil, both you and your king will perish." Saul was 30 years old when he became king, and he reigned over Israel 42 years. Saul picks 3,000 Israelite men, 2,000 of which stayed with him in Michmash and the rest stayed with his son Jonathan, who was in Gibeah. Jonathan attacked the Philistine outpost at Gibeah. The Philistines find out and Saul lets the rest of the Israelites know about the raid. They come to join the king while at Gilgal. The Philistines prepare to go to war with the Israelites and make camp at Michmash. The Philistines assembled to fight Israel, with 3,000 chariots, 6,000 charioteers, and soldiers as numerous as the sand on the seashore. They went up and camped at Michmash, east of Bethaven. When the Israelites saw that their situation was critical and that their army was hard-pressed, they hid in caves and thickets, among the rocks, and in pits and cisterns. Some Hebrews even crossed the Jordan to the land of Gad and Gilead. Saul remained at Gilgal, and all the troops with him were quaking with fear. He waited 7 days, the time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal, and Saul's men began to scatter. So he said, "Bring me the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings." And Saul offered up the burnt offering. Just as he finished making the offering, Samuel arrived, and Saul went out to greet him. Samuel rebuked Saul for not waiting for him and offering a burnt sacrifice. Samuel said to Saul, "I am the one the Lord sent to anoint you king over his people Israel, so listen now to the message from the Lord. This is what the Lord Almighty says, I will punish the Amalekites for what they did to Israel when they waylaid them as they came up from Egypt. Now go, attack the Amalekites and totally destroy all that belongs to them. Do not spare them, put to death men and women, children and infants, cattle and sheep, camels and donkeys." Saul gathers his army and attacks the Amalekites. He took Agag king of the Amalekites alive, and all his people he totally destroyed with the sword. But Saul and the army spared Agag and the best of the sheep and cattle, the fat calves and lamb, everything that was good. Saul again disobeyed God's instruction by not completely destroying them. Then the word of the Lord came to Samuel, "I regret that I have made Saul king, because he has turned away from me and has not carried out my instructions." Samuel confronts Saul, and Saul gives some excuses and blamed others for his disobedience. But Samuel replied, "Does the Lord delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices, as much as in obeying the Lord? To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than the fat of rams. For rebellion is like the sin of divination, and arrogance like the evil of idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has rejected you as king. God sends Samuel to Jesse of Bethlehem saying that he had chosen one of his sons to be king. Samuel arrives at Bethlehem and sees Eliab, and thought he is the one God has chosen. But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Jesse then introduces David, his youngest son, to Samuel. Then the Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, this is the one." Samuel anoints David, and from that day on the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Saul had asked Jesse, the father of David, to send his son to him to be under his service. David came to Saul and entered his service. Saul liked him very much, and David became one of his armor-bearers. Then Saul sent word to Jesse, saying, "Allow David to remain in my service, for I am pleased with him." The Philistines was planning to attack, so the Israelites prepared for the attack too. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span, more than 9 feet. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects, but if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. One day Jesse tells David to take food to the camp for his brothers and their commander. Jesse also wants David to come back and tell him how everything is faring at the camp. David leaves the sheep with the shepherd and goes to the camp in time to see the soldiers taking up their positions. David leaves the food with the quartermaster and goes to find his brothers. While he is speaking with them, he hears Goliath's challenge. Goliath is so intimidating that the Israelite soldiers run from him. David also hears that the man who defeats Goliath will be given great riches by the king, and the king will spare his father's family from paying tax and give the man his daughter in marriage. David asks to hear this again. This makes his eldest brother angry. He accuses David of malingering and coming down only because he wants to see the soldiers fight. Eventually, David goes to Saul and says that he will fight Goliath. Saul reminds him that he is only a boy, but David reminds him that he has killed lions and bears who tried to make off with his father's sheep. Saul then gives David permission to fight Goliath. He has David put on armor, but David is not comfortable in it and takes it off. David then takes up his staff, finds 5 stones, puts them in his pouch, and then goes out to face Goliath with his sling. Goliath takes a look at David and feels nothing but contempt, so he taunts him. David reminds Goliath that the Lord is on his side. Then, David fells Goliath with a single stone to the forehead and cuts off the giant's head with his own sword. This causes the Philistines to flee, only to be pursued by the Israelites. Saul sees David with Goliath's head, but he does not recognize him at first. David has to remind the king that he is the son of Jesse. The Israelites loved David. Whatever mission Saul sent him on, David was so successful that Saul gave him a high rank in the army. This pleased all the troops, and Saul's officers as well. The people danced and sang praises to David. This made Saul angry and began to attempt to kill David twice with a spear. David eluded him. Saul was afraid of David, because the Lord was with David but had departed from Saul. So Saul sent David away with 1,000 men. In everything he did he had great success, because the Lord was with him. The Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David defeated them and met with more success than the Saul and rest of his officers, and his name became well known. Saul fears David and envious of his successes, tries to kill David. But because the Lord is with David he avoids these attempts. David had many opportunities to kill Saul, but however he refused to do so. David runs away to the wilderness. Saul kept pursuing David, and hearing from his men that the Philistines are raiding their land, Saul broke off his pursuit of David and went to meet the Philistines. After Saul returned from pursuing the Philistines, he was told, "David is in the desert of En-Gedi." So Saul took 3,000 able young men from all Israel and set out to look for David and his men near the crags of the wild goats. Saul went in to relieve himself. David and his men were far back in the cave. Then David crept up unnoticed and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. David was conscience-stricken for having cut off a corner of his robe. He told Saul that he had spared his life and that he would not harm him. David told him that he had only cut a part of his robe, and that proved that David was not guilty of trying to kill him. David then asked Saul why he was hunting him down. He told Saul that God would judge them and also decide between the two of them. After David was finished speaking, Saul asked if that was really David's voice he was hearing. Saul wept and told David that he was more righteous than him. He told David that he had treated him well, better than Saul had treated David. Saul then told David that he knew he would be the king of Israel someday. Saul asked David to swear to him that he would not wipe out his descendants or remove his name from his father's family. David gave his promise to Saul. After that, Saul went back home, and David, along with his men, went to the stronghold. Now Samuel died, and all Israel assembled and mourned for him, and they buried him at his home in Ramah. Then David moved down into the desert of Paran. Still, Saul continues his pursuit, and David takes refuge with the Philistines, who show mercy to the great warrior and adversary of Israel's king. Preparing to fight the Philistines, Saul is racked with fear and consults a witch, bidding the spirit medium to conjure up the dead spirit of Samuel. Samuel's ghost angrily warns Saul that he and his sons will die fighting the Philistines, ensuring the demise of Saul's kingdom. David and his men head out to fight the Amalekites, and David succeeds in destroying the warring nation. In the meantime, Saul leads Israel into a losing battle with the Philistines, and Saul's sons, including Jonathan, are killed. Saul commands his armor-bearer to kill him, but the boy refuses, and Saul falls on his own sword and dies. Behind this story is contrast between the heart of Saul and the heart of David. Saul is filled with envy and self-pity, whilst the heart of David has only love, forgiveness, and a spirit of reconciliation. Saul is destroyed by his own evil heart, whilst David must endure the long tribulation that Saul's jealousy causes him. David trusted in God always and followed him irrespective of the often hard situation he had faced. Saul, on the other hand, drifted further away from God, from being the first king of Israel to someone who would consult evil spirits to save him, and totally ignoring God. 2 Samuel continues on with King David.